I'm Alex, 28 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's that favoritism runs deep. I wouldn't say I had a terrible childhood, but growing up, it was always obvious that my younger sister, Emily, was the golden child. My parents never outright admitted it, of course. They'd act as if they treated us equally, but actions speak louder than words. She got the newest phone every year. I got hand-me-downs. She got a car for her 16th birthday. I had to save up for a used one. She got expensive hobbies funded. I was told to be grateful for what we can afford. It was frustrating, sure, but I made peace with it over time. I worked hard, got a decent job, and built a comfortable life for myself. I wasn't struggling, but I also wasn't the kind of person to throw money around. I had responsibilities, bills, and a sense of financial independence that my sister never seemed to develop. Even now, as adults, the dynamic hasn't changed much. Emily is 25, still living at home, and somehow my parents continue to fund her lifestyle. She doesn't have a steady job, but that's okay, because she's still figuring things out. Meanwhile, I get the usual passive-aggressive comments about how I should visit more, how family is important, how I'm always busy with work. And yet, whenever I try to make an effort, it never quite feels reciprocated. The incident that really set everything in motion happened a few months ago. My parents had been talking about how tight money was. It wasn't surprising. They had always been bad with finances, constantly borrowing from relatives and never paying them back. I'd learned long ago not to lend them anything, but others in the family hadn't been so lucky. Over the holidays, my mom kept going on about how they just couldn't afford a big family trip this year. I hadn't even asked about one, but she made sure to emphasize it. You know how things are right now, Alex. Maybe next year. Fine, whatever. I didn't need a vacation with them anyway. I had my own plans. But then, about a week later, I was scrolling online when something caught my eye. A friend of mine had posted a picture from the airport. Nothing unusual, just a casual selfie near a gate. But in the background, sitting comfortably in first-class seats, were my parents and Emily. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a coincidence. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. There was my mom, in her signature oversized sunglasses. My dad, wearing that stupid jacket he always insisted made him look distinguished. Emily, laughing at something on her phone. The caption on my friend's post read, "Crazy seeing people I know at the airport. Hope y'all have an amazing trip." My stomach tightened. I clicked on their profile, scrolled a little more, and there it was, confirmation. My parents had taken a luxury vacation. Not just any vacation. A first-class, beachfront resort, expensive dinner every night kind of vacation. The kind they claimed they could never afford. And they hadn't even mentioned it to me. I sat there, staring at my screen, trying to process it. It wasn't just that they had lied. It wasn't just that they had excluded me. It was the principle of it. The blatant, casual way they had dismissed me while happily indulging my sister. I thought about saying something right away. A text, a call, even a sarcastic comment under the post. But something in me stopped. A familiar feeling. I knew my parents. I knew how they operated. If I confronted them now, they'd brush it off. Oh, it was a last-minute thing. We didn't think you'd be interested. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? No. If I was going to do something, I needed to be smart about it. So I stayed quiet. Days passed. They returned from their trip, posting the occasional picture, but otherwise acting as if nothing had happened. When I finally heard from my mom, it was a casual text. "Hope you're doing well. We should get together soon. It's been too long," smiley face. Too long. Right. I played along. I agreed to visit. And when I did, I sat through their stories about how hard things had been, how they were just getting by. They had no idea that I knew the truth. And then, just as I was about to leave, my mom smirked at me and said, "Maybe next time you should work harder. Then you could afford a trip like that too." I felt something snap. I smiled. Didn't react. But in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't let my expression change. If anything, I smiled wider, like I had just heard a mildly amusing joke. My mom had no idea what she had just done. If she had simply stayed quiet, if she had just let me walk out of that house without rubbing it in, maybe, just maybe, I would have let it go. But she didn't. Instead, she sat there, sipping her overpriced coffee in her designer sweater, smirking like she had won something. Like she had put me in my place. Like she thought I was jealous. I wasn't jealous. I was furious. But fury alone wouldn't do anything. No, I needed something more. Something that would actually make them feel what they had done. And as I drove home that night, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. The first thing I did was dig deeper. I already knew my parents had been bad with money, but I never really cared enough to investigate how bad. Now, I was curious. And the more I looked, the more I found. They weren't just bad with money. They were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. A mortgage payment that had been adjusted more than once. And then there were the loans. Some from banks, sure, but others from family. And that was where things got interesting. See, my parents had a pattern. They'd borrow money, swear up and down that they'd pay it back, then conveniently forget. If anyone pressed them, they'd act offended. We raised you. We gave you so much. You can't help us out just this once? They had done it to me when I was younger, before I wised up. But I wasn't the only one. I made a few calls. It turns out, my uncle, my mom's brother, had loaned them a significant amount last year when they claimed they were struggling to keep the house afloat. He hadn't expected them to pay it back quickly, but he also hadn't expected them to blow thousands of dollars on a luxury vacation while still owing him. And he wasn't the only one. My dad's cousin had covered some of their bills when they claimed they were on the verge of losing power. My grandma, who was on a fixed income, had given them money for emergencies. And they had spent it on first-class flights, five-star resorts, and gourmet meals. I didn't even have to say much. Just a few questions, a few casual mentions of their trip, and the anger started spreading. By the end of the week, half the family was fuming. My uncle, in particular, was livid. They told me they were struggling. He snapped over the phone. They said they were barely making ends meet. And they're out there drinking cocktails on the beach. Seems like it, I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was a long pause. Then, his voice dropped into something colder. They think they can just take from everyone and never pay up? I guess they do. He exhaled sharply. Not for long. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I hadn't planned to go at first. I wanted to wait, to let things simmer, but curiosity got the best of me. I needed to see it unfold. And, oh, did it unfold? It started subtly. A few side eyes. Some hushed conversations that stopped the moment my parents walked into the room. My mom, always the social butterfly, noticed immediately. She frowned, glancing at me like I was supposed to explain it. I just smiled. Then, my uncle approached. So, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "How was the vacation?" My mom blinked. Vacation? Yeah, the luxury resort. The first-class flights. His voice was sharp, his smile sharper. Must have been nice, spending all that money while still owing family thousands of dollars. Silence. Dead, heavy silence. I watched my mom's face shift, confusion, realization, panic. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was trying to come up with a way to spin this. It was a gift, my mom finally said. Emily's friend had a timeshare, and cut the lies, my uncle snapped. You lied. You took money from us, claimed you needed help, then blew it on yourselves. He looked around the room. And guess what? We're done. No more handouts. No more loans. You want to live like royalty? Figure it out yourselves. My parents started backtracking, begging. My dad swore they meant to pay everyone back. My mom tried to twist it into a guilt trip. We've done so much for this family. But it wasn't working. The damage was done. And as I stood there, watching my mother's face fall, watching my father struggle for words, watching my sister, who had been so smug before, look like she wanted to disappear, I knew this was just the beginning, because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was savoring every second. They had spent years manipulating, guilt-tripping, and using people for their own benefit, never expecting it to catch up with them. But now, they were squirming. And I wasn't going to stop here. After the disaster at the family gathering, things started unraveling fast. My parents had always relied on their ability to smooth-talk their way out of situations. The problem was, they had burned too many bridges. My uncle, furious and feeling betrayed, didn't just stop at calling them out in front of everyone. He made sure they felt it. First, he started making calls. A few days after the gathering, I got a text from him. Check your email. I did. And what I saw made me grin. It was a detailed spreadsheet of all the money my parents had borrowed over the years. Names, amounts, dates, excuses they had used. It was all there, meticulously documented. He hadn't just reached out to immediate family. He had talked to extended relatives, old family friends, even some of my parents' former coworkers. Turns out, they had a long history of conveniently forgetting debts. Some were small, $100 here, $200 there. Others? Thousands. And now, everyone was comparing notes. The next family event? My parents weren't invited. Not officially, anyway. But they showed up anyway, probably hoping to smooth things over. It didn't go well. The moment they walked in, the room went quiet. Conversation stalled. People exchanged glances. My mom, ever the social manipulator, put on her best concerned mother voice. "Is something wrong?" she asked, scanning the room. "Yeah," my uncle said, standing up. "You owe a lot of people a lot of money." My dad tried to laugh it off. "Come on, now. It's not that serious." "Not that serious?" My dad's cousin interjected. "You told me you were behind on bills, that you needed help, and I loaned you money for groceries," another relative chimed in. "Guess that went to a plane ticket instead, huh?" The pressure mounted. It was clear my parents had no way out. My mom tried her usual tactic, tears. "I can't believe you're all ganging up on us," she cried. "We're family." That was usually the line that worked. The line that made people back down, that made them soften. But not this time. "Family doesn't lie to each other like this," my uncle snapped. "You stole from us," another voice added. And then the final blow. "If you don't start paying people back, we're taking legal action." That shut them up. My dad turned pale. My mom stopped fake crying mid-sniffle. They knew they had messed up. At this point, I thought they would finally admit defeat, that they'd finally take responsibility. But I underestimated them. Because instead of owning up, my mom turned to me. "You did this," she hissed. "You turned everyone against us." I tilted my head. "Did I? Or did you do that to yourselves?" She shook her head, looking at me like I was some kind of traitor. "You always wanted this, didn't you?" She spat. "You always wanted to ruin us." I almost laughed. "No," I said calmly. "I wanted to be treated like family." But I guess that was too much to ask. At that, my dad grabbed my mom's arm and practically dragged her toward the door. My sister followed, looking down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. For once, she wasn't smirking. When they left, the room exhaled. People started talking again, shaking their heads, exchanging stories. And I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone in this. For years, I had been the outsider, the one who got less, the one who was told to just deal with it. But now, the truth was out, and I had people on my side. But this wasn't over. Because as much as I had exposed them, I still had more. More proof. More receipts. More ways to make sure they never pulled this scam again. And I knew exactly where to start. I spent the next few days getting everything in order, quietly, methodically. No more public confrontations for now. This wasn't a quick fix, and I needed to make sure the damage I caused was felt for real. It was time to dig deeper. I began by gathering every single email, text message, and document I could find. Some were from years ago, others from just a few months ago. It wasn't just family that my parents owed money to, it was also businesses, services, and even people they'd borrowed from under the guise of emergencies. The more I looked, the clearer it became. My parents had built their life on lies and borrowed money. And it wasn't just about getting back at them now. It was about making sure no one ever took advantage of family like this again. One evening, I sat at my desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside me as I sifted through my parents' old bank statements and phone bills. I knew what I was looking for, and soon enough, I found it. A series of large transfers that didn't add up. They were marked as family loans, but didn't show any record of repayment. In fact, they didn't even mention what the money was for. It was all just vague descriptions, personal emergency, medical costs, and, the kicker, investment opportunity. I couldn't help but scoff at that one. I printed out the documents and placed them neatly in a folder. That wasn't all. I still had more emails from old acquaintances who had lent them money when they promised it would only be a short-term thing. I even found a thread with my parents discussing how to fix their financial situation by borrowing from relatives and putting off paying bills for a few more months. It was all right there. And soon, it would be in the hands of anyone who could do something about it. Then came the next step, presenting everything. I reached out to my uncle, the one who had been so vocal during the family event. He had been the first one to call them out, and now he was the first one to get the full picture. I could hear the anger in his voice when I explained what I had found. "This is exactly what I was talking about," he said, pacing in his kitchen. "They've been lying to all of us for years, pretending to be struggling, all the while racking up debts and living like kings." "Exactly," I agreed. my fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. And I think it's time we show them just how many people they've taken advantage of. There was a long pause on the line, and then my uncle spoke again, his voice steady but determined. You know what we have to do. It's not just about them paying us back. It's about sending a message. I knew what he meant. I wasn't just going to get my parents to pay back the money they owed. I was going to make sure they felt every single consequence of their actions. And the first step in that was getting everyone who had been wronged by them in the same room. In the following week, I called up every single person who had been part of the loan chain. Relatives, old friends, acquaintances. I explained what I had found, how they had been manipulated, and asked if they were willing to take legal action if necessary. I expected some hesitation, maybe even a few people backing out. But surprisingly, almost everyone agreed. Even my grandmother, who had always been the calm, forgiving one, was furious. We raised them to know right from wrong, she said in a voice that barely contained her anger. And this is how they repay us? By stealing from their own family. I was starting to realize just how deep my parents' web of deceit went. And with every call I made, with every relative who agreed to stand with me, the harder it felt for me to even see them as my parents anymore. They weren't the people who had raised me. They were imposters who had manipulated me for years, using the pretense of family to cover up their actions. By the time the weekend came around, I had all the pieces in place. Everyone was ready, and I was just waiting for the right moment. I knew my parents wouldn't back down easily, but they didn't know what was coming for them. I called my parents that Saturday afternoon. I knew they were expecting me to be passive, to play along with their usual game. I wasn't going to give them that. When my mom picked up the phone, I didn't give her a chance to speak. We need to talk. There was silence on the other end. I'm not going to let this go. You're not getting away with this. What do you mean? She asked, her voice suddenly cautious. I've spoken to everyone you owe money to. You've lied and manipulated your way through family for far too long. I could hear her breathing sharply, probably preparing for her next excuse, but I wasn't giving her the space for it. I've also spoken to a lawyer. If you don't start paying people back, we'll take legal action. You're going to have to answer for what you've done. She let out a laugh, but it was hollow, nervous. You wouldn't do that to your own family. You did it to me. The words hung in the air. For a moment, she was quiet, and I knew she was calculating. She was trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor, but I wasn't going to let her. Not anymore. We'll see what happens when all of this comes out, I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. I sat back, exhaling slowly. I had done it. I had taken the first step in making them pay for what they had done. And now, there was no going back. But as I looked at the folder full of documents, as I realized how much bigger this was going to get, I couldn't help but wonder, had I just set something in motion that was bigger than I could handle? I would find out soon enough. The days after that phone call felt like an eternity. I could almost feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. My parents, who usually had an uncanny ability to smooth things over with a few words, were now completely silent. They didn't try calling me, didn't send any desperate texts or emails like they usually would when they needed to control the narrative. This time, they were cornered, and I knew it. I kept waiting for them to make some kind of move, some last-ditch effort to manipulate their way out of it. But nothing came. Instead, I started getting more calls from relatives. They'd all heard what had happened, and some had even reached out to my parents, offering them one last chance to make things right. Of course, my parents did what they did best. They tried to shift the blame. My kid is just trying to ruin us, my mom claimed to my aunt. They've always been difficult, always trying to make us look bad. But the thing was, people were starting to see through them. The more they tried to spin the situation, the more people realized they were just playing their usual games. The family wasn't buying it anymore. A week later, I received another message from my uncle, the one who had been instrumental in calling them out during the family gathering. He'd gone ahead and contacted the lawyer on his own and put together a formal demand letter for repayment. The debts weren't small, some were significant, others even larger, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about setting a precedent. It was about showing my parents, and anyone else who thought they could take advantage of family, that there were consequences for their actions. When my parents received that letter, they couldn't deny it any longer. They knew the people they owed money to weren't going to back down. They knew the family was done making excuses for them. And as the pressure built, my mom reached out to me. Her message was brief. We need to talk. I wasn't sure what she expected, but I wasn't going to give her a free pass. I met her at a coffee shop the next day. She looked disheveled, not the usual put-together version of herself. She didn't waste time. I know you're upset, she began, avoiding eye contact. And I know things have gotten out of hand. I let her talk, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. Out of hand, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You've been manipulating people for years. I was the one who had to suffer for it. But you know what? It's not just me anymore. It's everyone. And they're not going to let you get away with it. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers twisting around her coffee cup. Finally, she spoke again. I didn't want this to happen. I wanted to laugh. Of course, she didn't want this to happen. Who would want their lives to come crashing down? But I didn't say anything. Instead, I stood up to leave, but before I could walk away, she grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. Please, she whispered. Please, don't do this. It's not too late. We can fix this. We can make it right. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her pleading face. I could feel the years of manipulation, the years of hurt and betrayal, clawing at me. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. No, I said quietly, meeting her gaze. You've had plenty of chances to make things right. Now it's too late. With that, I walked away. It wasn't over, but I had done what I set out to do. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call they needed. But the thought lingered in the back of my mind. What happens next? I'd set the wheels in motion, but the fallout was still coming. I wasn't sure how far they'd go to protect themselves. But I knew one thing for sure. The family dynamic would never be the same again. So now, I'm asking you all, what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Am I justified in exposing them like this? Or did I go too far? I could really use some perspective, because, honestly, I'm not sure if I've done the right thing or just made a mess that'll be hard to clean up. Let me know what you think.